A farmer rubs his eyes. Did he really witness that? He looked out over his field and saw nothing but odd white orbs. He made sure a few days ago that everything was stable, and it was. Mirror inspection revealed the white things to be hundreds of eggs. Not long after, he became aware of a peculiar but recognizable sound. After hearing the news, Hans rushed straight home to shock his wife, Bonnie, and children, Mary and Giselle, awake. They hurried outdoors together, and what they saw left the girl speechless. Bonnie asked her husband, "Is this what I believe it is?" With tears in her eyes. Nothing lived in the field anymore. The maize had all been harvested. Eggs, on the other hand, were strewn throughout the area. Seeing that the time for hatching was near, Hans mounted his tractor and prepared to demolish the nests, but his daughters stopped him. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and click the notification bell for more amazing stories. They barricaded themselves in front of the tractor and refused to be moved. The children were puzzled by their father's callousness in killing a sentient creature. Hans proposed a solution to calm down his kids, but it was a one that left them in full disbelief. "But Hans, what did you suggest?" When they eventually hatched, he cried, "But why?" The life of a farmer is governed by a number of rituals. They get up and go to work before the sun even comes up. They work quite long hours every day. In addition, the payoff is substantial. The life of a farmer was Hans's lifelong ambition, and now that he finally had the opportunity to pursue it, he knew he could do anything. At least, that's what he believed at the time. Hans and his wife Bonnie have raised 2 kids, Mary and Giselle. They own a farm where they raise animals and produce food, mostly maize. It's a straightforward existence where extraordinary events are rare. You can only imagine the look of disbelief on Hans' face when he finally opened his eyes this morning. Hans got up and dressed normally. His customary treatment of his wife includes allowing her to sleep in longer than he does. He prepared breakfast so they could eat as soon as they awoke with the family. Hans had just finished his morning chores and was about to feed his animals when he was suddenly confronted by a strange man. Hans noticed an odd noise outside as he stood in the kitchen. He couldn't tell where it was coming from since it was still night, but he'd never heard anything like it before. Something about it made him feel off. He was just listening to the noise in the kitchen when he was suddenly overcome with fear. His wife Bonnie was the culprit. She quietly approached from behind and touched him on the back of the head. When Hans saw this, he screamed in a very loud voice because he was so frightened. They were all in good spirits, notwithstanding Hans's displeasure. He was going to go investigate the source of the noise, but it had already stopped. Suddenly, his 2 kids followed him downstairs and began searching the area anxiously.
"I can't find Mom. Can you tell whether she's okay? We heard her scream."
His daughters cried. When Hans saw his wife, they had a warm exchange. Even though it seemed like a typical day was ready to begin, they had no idea what was going on in the world outside. After the family had finished eating, Hans went outside to tend to his animals. With his meal in tow, he headed to the hen house. In an unusual turn of events, his hens began to act up. They scampered all around the coop as if they were afraid of something. And yet, afterward, Hans became aware of still another detail. There was just 1 chicken left in the coop. Whence might he have come? After circling the enclosure, he paused to examine a little clump of feathers that had fallen to the floor.
"Oh no!"
He moaned to himself. Surely this is bad news. What this meant to Hans was clear as day. After wrapping the dead chicken in a towel, he hurried back inside to place it in a box. The suddenness of its death begs the question.
How? That chicken was fine yesterday. How did it manage to escape the coop?
He went on with his routine and went to the pigs. Their volume level increased from normal. Inquiring, what the heck is going on? Hans had a private notion. He gave the pigs food, and they settled down for a moment. However, Hans sensed that something was off, and he would soon learn the answer to that question. Then, all of a sudden, he heard that peculiar noise again. In spite of his best efforts, he was unable to identify its source. If he could hear it well, it wasn't too far away. It was unlike anything he had heard before. The sound was almost animal-like, but what type of animal could it be? He finished feeding the livestock and then walked into the barn to prepare his tractor. Today was the first day of harvesting the fields, and he had maize to pick first. Unaware of what was occurring beneath his tractor, he connected up the device to his and unlocked the barn doors. Just as he was ready to leave, he heard a terrible scream. Indeed, that was Mary.
Stop, Dad.
Something is lying there on the ground. They said she saw a ghost from the expression on her face. Mary indicated the wheels of the tractor, and Hans leapt down as soon as he saw them. In the path of one of the tractor's wheels lay a sick, small cat. If Mary hadn't come outside, Hans probably would have ran over the unfortunate animal. The kitten's ears were marked with mysterious blood. In addition to being clearly undernourished, Mary volunteered to take care of the animal, and Hans accepted her offer right away. Usually, Hans's days ran smoothly and without much excitement, but today, everything seemed to pile up and he lost sight of time. This was the first time he'd ever seen markings like those on an animal. Probably one of the barn cats, who are typically rather sociable, was to blame for it. His second daughter, Giselle, came racing through the front door before he had time to process what had occurred.
Dad, you have to look at the cornfield.
I was finally ready to go. So yes, Giselle. In a sigh, Hans waited, but he had a great surprise in store for him. Hans climbed back into his tractor and headed out to the farm. As it was just across from his house, getting there wasn't difficult. In the distance, he saw a few white spots, but he didn't give them any thought until he got closer. We don't even know what this was, but what was it? I can't believe it. They both glanced at their spouse in shock. As he prepared to respond, he once again heard the eerie familiar sound. All morning, Hans has been alerted to the same noise. All this time, it was harvested straight from the field. He got down on his knees and put his chin on one of the eggs. Then, he suddenly sprang up, frightened. What's inside? Mary and Giselle bent down and glanced at the eggs, while hunkering down and listening intently. The eggs showed signs of being close to hatching, but Hans wanted them gone, so he rode his tractor at them until his daughters stopped him. They barricaded themselves in front of the tractor and refused to be moved. To calm down his daughters, Hans offered something that utterly surprised them. Well, ladies, we can't preserve the crops at this point, but maybe we can save the eggs, Hans remarked. The girls' expressions brightened as they leaped with excitement. However, they had to find out how to maintain a large number of eggs at a constant temperature. Nearly 20 eggs were dispersed throughout the grass. Hans was worried that if they moved the eggs, something bad might happen to them. I don't know how he planned to transport those eggs without breaking them. These items seemed to be fairly delicate. In order to protect the eggs, he proposed covering them with a heavy black tarp. If it begins to rain, they can stay dry, and if the sun comes out, they can stay nice and toasty beneath the tarp. The idea thrilled the girls, who immediately returned to the barn in search of a tarp. Bonnie, though, was not sharing the girls' enthusiasm. She took a worried glance around at all the eggs and pondered their origin and their arrival. Consider the possibility that these are, in fact, snake eggs. Since Bonnie disapproved of hurting animals, She had no intention of injuring any of them, particularly the ones she knew were completely defenseless. Hans felt his wife's anxiety and comforted her with a hug. "Relax, sweetheart. Those things remind me of chicken eggs. Have no fear, everything will be okay." His intention was to reassure Bonnie, but instead, he only raised additional concerns in her mind. Their girls came back shortly after carrying a substantial black tarp. They worked together to tie the cover over the eggs with pebbles. Then, Hans answered, "So, get back to work." Hans has instructed his daughters to be very cautious in their job, as he would rather not have any of the eggs broken. However, his offspring bonded intensely with the eggs. As Hans went about his day, they remained with them. Hans finally got his daughters inside after luring them with dessert. One morning, Hans was awakened by an eerie sound. However, today was different from yesterday. There were more giggling sounds this time. It only took Hans a second to figure out what it was, and he immediately sprang to his feet. A field caught his eye, so he sprinted to the window. "You've got to be kidding me." What he had suspected was correct. They got up before him and went to the eggs. "What the heck time is it?" A loud statement from Hans roused his sleeping wife. She started to inquire, "What's going on, hun?" before hearing giggling. Bonnie sprung awake and dashed down the stairs. She ran out the door in her robe and boots. It was obvious that these eggs were terrible news. Bonnie murmured to Hans, "This is not how we raised our daughters." Bonnie prayed fervently that the eggs were safe. Perhaps the females in this place were acting carelessly. As Mary and Giselle saw their irate mother coming, their grins disappeared. The sky was still dark, but they could tell they'd messed up by looking at the eggs. They treated them like newborns. Those eggs had a weird quality about them. Bonnie's initial shock at what her daughters had been up to quickly evolved to admiration. Giselle and Mary got some hay and straw from the barn and made tiny nests for the eggs. It's not like Bonnie's daughters would do anything like this. Something about this warmed Bonnie's heart, and she stopped shouting and started praising her girls for being such wonderful egg guards. Hans grinned at his wife and said, "They'll make great farmers someday." Even though Hans was really pleased with his daughters, his joy was short-lived as they heard a loud snap. Then all of a sudden, there was a loud snap. The girls sprang to their feet in surprise, certain that they had accidentally broken one of them. Since they had taken such meticulous care of the eggs, everyone expected something to hatch. While inspecting the eggs, Giselle saw that one of them had a large break in its shell. She yelled with delight as she showed Mary. "The time is drawing near, and here's a reminder for you, Mary." Mary, however, had a completely unexpected reaction. To everyone's surprise, Mary reacted in a manner none saw coming. She should have been pleased, but instead she became quite upset and began to weep. She was worried that her eggs would crack. Her mother did her best to explain everything to her, but she was too little to comprehend it. Bonnie made an effort to clarify, but to no avail. Instead, she brought Mary inside to help with the ailing kitten. It was for the best that the kitty was hungry, but Hans still had no idea what lay inside those eggs. The eggs had been discovered 2 days before. Tarp did a great job of protecting the eggs from the elements and predators. The shells of more eggs began to break, signaling that the time for hatching was near. After waiting for 4 days, the moment has arrived. Hans went to check on the eggs and saw that one of them had hatched. The infant was nowhere to be seen as he hurriedly searched the area. He rounded up the ladies, and they waited with the other eggs till they hatched. After what seemed like an interminable period of waiting, the girls were relieved to see 2 more eggs begin to show signs of life. They broke and moved about. A little animal emerged slowly but certainly. None of them had ever seen something like this before. Hans was shocked by what he saw. He had not expected these particular creatures to hatch from eggs. He called out for his wife, unable to contain his feelings any longer. He burst into tears and couldn't stop them. When his wife came home, he lost it and started weeping. When she questioned his demeanor, he pointed to the animals. Bonnie understood what was going on right away, and she consoled her husband. On the other hand, watching what developed from those eggs made her feel a lot of emotions. There were young peacocks among the animals. When he was a kid, Hans' favorite animals were peacocks. He was so well off that he even had a pet peacock. He hasn't shown any interest in peacocks since its death. It felt miraculous, yet this isn't all there is. The thought of giving up the animals broke Hans' heart, so he argued with Bonnie to retain them all. They couldn't keep 20 peacocks since there wasn't enough space on the property. Hans was well aware of the fact that this was the only viable alternative. Only 2 peacocks remained at the property after Bonnie and Hans donated the other 18 to a peacock sanctuary. The girls enjoyed caring for the peacock and knew they would have the freedom they deserved there, binding bonds through beautiful tales. Thank you for watching.